My name is Natalie Green, and I'm 25 years old. A year ago, I thought I was finally living the dream. I'd landed a job that felt like the golden ticket, account executive at Archway Dynamics, a rising tech consultancy in San Diego. They hired me straight out of my internship, and within 18 months, I was managing multi-million-dollar accounts while most of my college friends were still trying to get entry-level roles. I didn't come from the kind of background you usually see in places like that. No private school, no family friends in venture capital. My mom is a nurse, my dad's a retired electrician. We were comfortable, but every penny I spent getting through school was one I had to either earn or borrow. That hunger to prove myself? It wasn't ambition, it was survival. Archway was flashy. We had cold brew on tap, sleek glass-walled offices, Friday happy hours on rooftop patios. Everyone seemed impossibly confident and well-dressed, and for the first few months, I felt like I was wearing someone else's life. But I worked. I worked hard. I stayed late, took notes in meetings no one else bothered to prepare for, built relationships with junior client managers who would later become my biggest champions. Carter Delano, my direct manager, was the kind of man who made you feel both noticed and invisible at the same time. He'd praise me in meetings, saying things like, "Natalie's got fire," but he'd also take credit for my work so smoothly you'd barely notice. I learned to nod, smile, and keep producing. That was the game, and I was playing to win. Then came the Hawthorne lead. If you don't know Hawthorne Technologies, think, the type of client that could make a career. Fortune 500, global operations, decades-old systems needing modern cloud infrastructure. They'd invited proposals from 5 firms, including us. Carter pulled me aside the day the RFP landed on his desk. "This could be big for you," he said, sliding the folder toward me with a tight smile. "But no promises. It's a long shot." He didn't say it, but I heard it loud and clear. "If you win this, I get the credit. If you lose, it's on you." I poured myself into that project. I skipped weekends, canceled dinners, and lived on protein bars and caffeine. I built a tailored proposal from scratch, pulled technical diagrams together with help from our engineers, and hosted virtual workshops with Hawthorne's IT team. I even flew to Chicago last minute to meet their CIO, Melissa Keene, during their annual budget planning session. I paid for the flight myself, our travel budget had been frozen. Melissa was sharp, no nonsense. She asked tough questions and didn't tolerate vague answers. But I respected her, and over time, we developed a rhythm. I think she saw a little of herself in me, young, underestimated, relentlessly prepared. We'd talk late at night after meetings, not just about business, but about leadership, ambition, and what it means to be the only woman in a room full of men who assume you're someone's assistant. 4 months of grinding. That's what it took. Then on a rainy Tuesday in March, I got the email. Signed contract. $3.8 million over 3 years. Not only the biggest deal I'd ever closed, but the biggest in Archway's history. I stared at my screen in disbelief, then reread it 3 times just to be sure. My hands were trembling. I remember whispering, "Oh my God," under my breath, then sitting back and letting the joy wash over me. I ran to Carter's office. He high-fived me, gave me that grin that never quite reached his eyes, and said, "Nice work. Really nice work." He called an all-hands meeting that afternoon. "Big win today," he announced to the room. "Historic. Archway has officially entered the big leagues." He nodded in my direction. Natalie was the lead on this one. Great execution. And that was it. No details, no moment to speak. Just a head nod before moving on to quarterly pipeline reviews. I stood there awkwardly, clapping along with everyone else, feeling like I'd just won gold only to have my medal taken off mid-podium. Still, I brushed it off. The deal was mine, and no one could take that from me. Or so I thought. 2 days later, at 8:30 a.m., I got a calendar invite from HR, quick check-in, 10 minutes. I walked in, and it wasn't even in person. A Zoom call. Carter wasn't there. Just Elise from HR, wearing that tight-lipped smile that meant bad news. "Natalie, we're restructuring," she began. "This isn't a reflection of your performance. It's a business decision. Effective today, your role has been eliminated." My ears rang. I could barely breathe. Eliminated? After I just closed Hawthorne? She blinked, clearly uncomfortable. "We're grateful for everything you've done. Truly. You'll be receiving a severance package." I didn't hear the rest. My brain was screaming. I packed my things in silence that afternoon. No one looked at me. No one said goodbye. I sat in my car in the garage, clutching the steering wheel, shaking. I hadn't even told my dad about the deal yet. He'd always said, "One day you'll land a client so big, they'll never let you go." He was wrong. They let me go. Right after I gave them exactly what they wanted. But the story wasn't over. The next morning, my phone rang. It was Melissa. "Natalie," she said. "I heard what happened. I want you to know, we signed that contract because of you. Not Archway. You earned our trust. And if you're open to it, I'd like to talk about your next move." My heart stopped. My future, which had looked like a dead end less than 24 hours before, had just reopened, with a door I never expected. And this time, I wasn't walking through it for anyone else. The call with Melissa was only 12 minutes, but it changed everything. She wasn't just offering sympathy, she was offering opportunity. "I'm not just calling as your former client," she said. "I'm calling as someone who sees what you're capable of. If Archway was foolish enough to let you go, maybe it's time to build something of your own. Build something of my own." The words hung in the air long after we hung up. I sat on the edge of my bed, still in sweatpants, my laptop open to job listings I couldn't bring myself to apply for. I was 25, unemployed, and for the first time in my adult life, completely free. I'd spent years building someone else's empire. Maybe Melissa was right, maybe it was time I built my own. That night, I couldn't sleep. My mind raced with ideas. What if I started my own consultancy? Not big. Just something lean, something mine. I knew the product space. I had contacts, experience, and now, I had Hawthorne. Sort of. I called Melissa the next morning. "If I did this," I asked, "would you come with me?" There was a pause. Then, she said, "Draft the structure. We'll be your first client." I sat there stunned. Not just because she said yes, but because of how fast everything was shifting. I had gone from being fired to forming a business in 36 hours. I didn't even have a company name yet. The next few weeks were a blur. I incorporated as Greenbridge Consulting. It sounded like a bridge between where businesses were and where they needed to be. I designed a logo myself at 2 a.m. one night and filed for an EIN number on my couch while eating cereal. Melissa walked me through Hawthorne's contract transition. They had an opt-out clause if key personnel left Archway, and apparently, I counted. I thought Carter might fight it, but he didn't. Maybe he was afraid of drawing attention to how badly they'd mishandled things. Or maybe he didn't think I'd pull it off. I used the last of my savings to hire a lawyer and an accountant. I built a pitch deck. I turned my tiny second bedroom into an office, which was really just a folding desk and a coffee maker. I was terrified. But I'd never felt more alive. One night, maybe 3 weeks in, my dad called. "How's unemployment treating you?" he asked in that teasing, big dad energy voice. I started my own firm. Silence. Then, "What do you mean?" I told him everything. About Hawthorne. About Greenbridge. About how I'd been scared, but it felt right. When I finished, he said, "Natalie, you've always been too smart to work for people who don't see you. I'm proud of you." I hadn't realized how much I needed to hear that until I did. A month after launching, I had my first official Greenbridge paycheck. It wasn't huge, but it was mine. I printed it out and taped it to the fridge. But success didn't come without consequences. 2 weeks later, Carter called me. "Hey," he said, like nothing had happened. "We, noticed you're working with Hawthorne." I didn't say anything. I just let the silence do the work. "That's interesting," he continued. "We were hoping we could discuss a potential collaboration. Maybe subcontract you on some of our larger deals." I almost laughed. "You mean the ones you'd have handed me if I was still there?" Another pause. He coughed. "Look, Natalie. This doesn't have to be adversarial. We think there's still value in." "Carter," I said, interrupting. "You fired me right after I landed the biggest deal in company history. You made your decision. Now I'm making mine." I hung up. For the first time, I felt like I'd taken my power back. The day after I hung up on Carter, I got another call, this time from someone I never expected, Jonathan Patel, Senior VP at Argonet. They'd been one of Hawthorne's biggest rivals during the RFP process. "We heard you're independent now," he said, cutting straight to the point. "Got time for lunch?" I hesitated. Argonet had never given me the time of day while I was at Archway. But now? Suddenly I was interesting. We met at a cafe downtown. I wore my only pressed blazer and showed up 10 minutes early, just like I always had. Jonathan arrived late, took one look at my laptop and said, "You know Hawthorne wasn't an accident, right?" I didn't say anything. I waited. "You won them over." "Not Archway." "We all saw it. Your pitch was tight, your strategy clear, and you had Melissa backing you. That means something." He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "We're looking to shake things up at Argonet. We've got 3 legacy systems bleeding money. If you can do for us what you did for them, there's a budget." It wasn't just a proposition. It was validation. The respect I had scraped for over 3 years was finally showing up, ironically, only after I'd walked away from the structure that was supposed to nurture it. I took the job. Within 6 weeks, Greenbridge went from a solo gig to a one-woman tornado. I was managing 2 major clients, juggling back-to-back calls, building project plans and deliverables at midnight, and doing my own taxes badly in between. It was chaos. It was beautiful. But success has a weird way of showing you who people really are. I started getting texts from old colleagues. Some congratulated me. Some asked how they could do the same. And a few hinted at wanting in. Like Erin. Erin and I had started at Archway the same month. She had this breezy, effortless way of fitting in with the partners that I never quite managed. While I was working through weekends, she was getting lunch invites with the CMO. We were never close, but we'd always been cordial. Now she wanted to grab coffee. We met at the same cafe where I'd had lunch with Jonathan. She arrived in a blazer I recognized from a marketing campaign we did for a fintech client, fitting, because our conversation felt just as rehearsed. "I've been thinking about making a move," she said. "You've built something really impressive. And I mean, if you ever needed help, I'd love to collaborate." Translation: things at Archway are shaky, and now that you're hot, I want in. I smiled politely but didn't make promises. I wasn't stupid. But it was after she left that the realization hit me, I was becoming the kind of person people watched. People calculated around. People wanted things from. It wasn't good or bad. It was just new. And it meant I had to start being even more careful. Meanwhile, Melissa kept her word. We had our first quarterly review with Hawthorne's executive board, and she didn't hold back. She credited me for every strategy pivot, every cost-saving initiative, every KPI exceeded. Watching her go to bat for me like that, it made something in me tighten and then relax in the same breath. Afterward, she pulled me aside. "You do know Carter tried to spin a story about you, right?" she said. I froze. He claimed you were emotional, hard to manage, difficult to lead. Classic nonsense. My stomach turned. I shouldn't have been surprised. Men like Carter don't like watching the people they underestimate rise. But hearing it out loud? It still stung. Melissa gave me a knowing look. I told him, funny. She doesn't seem emotional to us. Just effective. Then I hung up. I wanted to laugh and cry at the same time. The next day, I got a FedEx envelope. Inside was a card, handwritten, and a small leather notebook. It was from my dad. On the inside flap, he'd scribbled. For your next big client. I know there'll be many. Dad. I sat there holding it, suddenly overwhelmed by everything. The fear. The exhaustion. The pride. Because I'd done it. I'd turned a pink slip into power. And I was just getting started. Word travels fast in this industry, especially when a 20-something woman starts pulling million-dollar clients out from under a legacy firm. At first, it was subtle. A few skeptical LinkedIn messages. Comments like, didn't realize you were launching something, or, impressive for someone so young. Backhanded compliments cloaked in professionalism. But then it got real. I was on a Zoom call with an operations lead at a mid-size logistics firm, potential new client, when he casually said, "We've heard some things about you from Archway." My spine stiffened. "Oh?" I asked lightly. He tilted his head, almost like he was waiting for me to defend myself. "They said you can be intense. Not always a team player." I felt a slow burn start behind my eyes. I knew that tone. That was Carter, planting his little bombs on the back channels. I straightened in my chair. Would you rather someone polite, or someone who saved your cloud migration from burning $2.4 million over budget? There was a pause. Then he smiled. Fair point. We closed the deal 2 weeks later. The higher I rose, the louder the noise got. I wasn't just an ex-employee anymore, I was competition. Carter had sent a clear message: discredit her. Undermine her reputation. Make her look unhinged. But what he didn't realize was that I wasn't alone anymore. Melissa started introducing me to her network. CTOs, CIOs, procurement heads, all people who trusted her, and by extension, now trusted me. I began fielding calls almost daily. Some were small startups looking for guidance. Others were corporations quietly exploring how to exit bloated vendor contracts. My days became a blur of meetings and midnight strategy sessions. I hired a virtual assistant and a junior analyst, 2 women I'd mentored in past internships. They were sharp, hungry, and just as determined as I was to build something real. But not everyone was thrilled. One night, I got a message from a former Archway colleague, someone I'd been friendly with, someone I thought was on my side. "Hey, just a heads up. Carter's trying to get ahead of your narrative. He's been saying you were insubordinate. Unstable." My stomach twisted, but I wasn't shocked. The irony? At Archway, I'd followed every rule. Dressed the part. Played nice. Bit my tongue. Now that I was succeeding without them, they wanted to rewrite the ending. But here's the thing about narratives, they only stick if you don't speak your own. So, I did something bold. I spoke up. I agreed to do a podcast interview with a tech leadership channel, a niche one, but respected. The host asked me about launching Greenbridge, about getting fired after a big win. And I told the truth. Calmly. Factually. No drama, just details. I closed the largest deal in company history. 2 days later, I was let go without cause. That's not a grudge. That's a pattern worth examining. The episode went live on a Wednesday. By Friday, my inbox was flooded. Messages from women. From other solo consultants. From founders. Even from a few quiet Archway employees who wrote things like, "Thank you for saying what we couldn't." Carter never responded publicly. But I knew he'd heard it. You don't ignore an explosion that loud. And just when I thought things were stabilizing, something happened that changed everything. One morning, Melissa forwarded me an internal memo from a vendor Archway had just signed. Subject line, pending partnership with Greenbridge, conflict? In the body, someone had flagged my firm as a reputational risk. I stared at it, then reread it twice. It wasn't about performance. It wasn't about quality. It was about fear. Greenbridge was rising fast, and Archway had started to sweat. And that? That was the moment I knew we weren't just surviving. We were a threat. The email was short, clinical. Just a forwarded thread, really. But I couldn't stop staring at it. We believe a continued relationship with Greenbridge could present reputational complications given their recent public commentary. Please advise. It was buried in a vendor partnership discussion between Archway and a major tech distributor. And there I was, flagged like a virus. I forwarded it to my attorney. Yes, I had one now. Ellie was young, fierce, and as no-nonsense as they come. She called me within 10 minutes. They're trying to blacklist you, she said. They won't say it outright, but that's what this is. Blacklisted. It sounded dramatic. Like something from a Cold War thriller. But this was real. I was a small firm growing fast, and they were trying to kill the momentum before it became unmanageable. But they'd underestimated something. I'd already lived through silence. I knew what it was like to shrink myself to survive. I wasn't doing that again. So we went on offense. Ellie drafted a cease and desist. We didn't send it right away, just kept it in our back pocket. Meanwhile, I reached out to the vendor directly. No lawyers. No drama. Just clarity. I saw the email. I'm not here to burn bridges, but let's be clear, your concern is not with performance. It's with discomfort. And discomfort isn't risk. It's growth. To my surprise, they backed off. The exec who'd flagged me emailed an apology the next day. We respect the work you're doing, he wrote. Let's keep the focus on value. I wanted to cry with relief. Not because I needed their approval, but because I realized I didn't need to apologize for being visible. Around the same time, I started getting invited to speak at panels. Mostly women in tech events. One of them asked if I'd share my journey, a phrase that always feels a little too polished for what actually happened. I said yes anyway. That night, I stood in a downtown co-working space, facing a room full of women in blazers and jeans, sipping wine from plastic cups. And I told them the truth. I got fired right after I did the best work of my life. Not because I failed, but because I succeeded in a way they didn't like. A few people gasped. One woman in the back wiped her eye. Afterward, someone approached me, a woman around my age, nerves buzzing under her skin. I'm about to walk away from a job where they won't promote me unless I stop outshining my manager, she whispered. Do you think it's worth it? I looked her in the eye. If you're asking, you already know. The next few months were a whirlwind. Greenbridge grew faster than I could keep up with. We added 3 new clients, one of them a mid-tier telecom firm that had dropped Archway for being too rigid. I hired 2 more staffers, a project lead and a strategist. Both women. Both brilliant. We operated out of a scrappy little suite downtown, with a chipped coffee machine and windows that rattled when the wind picked up. But every time I walked in, I felt something I never had at Archway, belonging. And yet, part of me still watched my back. Carter hadn't gone quiet. He was still taking little swings. Whispers. Passive-aggressive posts on LinkedIn about entitlement culture and gratitude in the workplace. I ignored it. Mostly. Until one day, someone sent me a screenshot. An internal training deck from Archway's onboarding. In one of the slides, there it was. Case study, what happens when loyalty is undervalued. Below it, A vague story about a young employee who disrupted client trust and damaged internal morale. No name. But no question it was about me. I forwarded it to Ellie. This time, we sent the letter. The deck disappeared within 24 hours. A few nights later, I stood on my balcony with a glass of cheap Prosecco, looking out at the lights of the city. I thought about the girl I was a year ago, the one who sat in her car, sobbing in an empty parking garage, wondering how everything could disappear overnight. And I thought about the woman I was now. Running her own company. Owning her narrative. Not begging for a seat at the table, building a new one. I was in the middle of prepping a client pitch when I saw the name pop up on my screen, Carter Delano. I stared at it like it was a glitch. Surely it had to be some mistake. Maybe a pocket dial. Maybe someone else with the same name. Nope. It was him. I let it go to voicemail. Then I opened my inbox and found it waiting there too, a long, carefully worded email. Hi Natalie. I hope this message finds you well. I've been following Greenbridge's success and wanted to extend congratulations on what you've built. We're exploring new partnership structures at Archway and I'd love to chat about potential collaboration, perhaps even a more formal return to the team. Let's talk soon. I laughed. Out loud. Right there in my tiny office with the peeling paint on the window frame and the humming fridge in the corner. The same man who cut me loose like dead weight now wanted me back, wanted to partner. I didn't respond immediately. I needed time. Not to consider it, I knew my answer, but to process the audacity of it. I met with Melissa that evening over dinner and showed her the message. She read it twice, then set her fork down slowly. Let me guess, she said. He said it's a new direction. New structure, I corrected. Same nonsense. She shook her head and smiled. Natalie, they're bleeding. You were the one who knew the product, the clients, the pulse. They didn't see your value until you made it impossible to ignore. She was right. They weren't offering me a job out of grace. They were trying to reclaim what they lost. Dress it up in corporate fluff and call it strategy. But it was desperation. So I replied. Short. Professional. Decisive. Hi Carter. Thank you for your message. At this time, I'm fully focused on building Greenbridge and am not pursuing partnerships with former employers. Best. Natalie. I hit send. And felt the most satisfying, liberating click of my life. 3 days later, I was speaking at a panel in New York, something I never imagined I'd be doing a year earlier. The topic was young founders in traditional spaces. I shared the stage with 2 fintech CEOs and a woman who'd built a data privacy platform from her garage. When it was my turn to speak, someone asked, "What's the hardest part of going out on your own after being burned?" I didn't hesitate. Believing you're allowed to build without permission, I said. I spent years waiting for someone to validate me. To tell me I was ready. But the truth is, no one will ever hand you your moment. You have to take it. And when you do, you realize how little you needed their permission in the first place. There was a quiet hum in the room. Heads nodding. Eyes widening. I felt the energy shift. These women got it. That night in my hotel room, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. I'm at Archway. Still. Just wanted you to know, after your interview, 3 people asked me how they could work for you. Thought you should hear that. A fan in the shadows. I didn't know who it was. I didn't ask. But it meant something. Not because I needed the applause, but because it reminded me, the work speaks. The truth speaks. Even when others try to silence it. The following week, I closed a deal with an international NGO. Small budget, high impact. I did it not because it was lucrative, but because it mattered. Because I could choose now. My success wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about freedom. It was just after 9 a.m. when I stepped into our new office space. Sunlight poured through tall, arched windows and the walls still smelled like fresh paint. The lease had been signed a week earlier. Triple the square footage. Room for 6 more hires. A real front desk. Greenbridge was no longer an idea. It was a name on the door. As I stood there alone for a moment, listening to the muffled city outside, I thought about everything it took to get here. How it started in a spare bedroom with a folding table and a second-hand monitor. How I once answered client calls with a shaky voice and a coffee-stained sweatshirt. How I fought to be taken seriously while dodging smear campaigns, sabotage, and silence. And how I got up anyway. It wasn't about proving anything to Carter anymore. It wasn't even about Archway. I'd stopped checking their updates, stopped watching for signs of collapse or success. They weren't my competition. I was in a different league now. A few weeks later, I was invited to keynote a leadership summit for women in consulting. Big stage. Big crowd. National exposure. I stood backstage holding the remote for my slides, breathing slow and steady. A few years ago, I would have been terrified. But now? Now I felt calm. When they called my name, I stepped into the light. The applause was loud, but I didn't let it distract me. I started with a story. Not the one about getting fired. Not even the one about landing Hawthorne. I started with the first time I was told I lacked executive presence, because I had ideas that were too bold for my age. The audience laughed knowingly. I saw heads nod, eyes narrow with recognition. Then I told them what came next. The betrayal. The rebuild. The freedom. And I ended with this. You don't need to be invited to the table to build your own. And when you build it, don't just seat yourself. Make room. Leave the door open. Because someone out there is still being told they're not enough, and they need to see what it looks like when someone like them makes it. I walked off stage to a standing ovation. And I smiled, not because of the applause, but because I knew someone in that room had just made a decision they wouldn't come back from. The same way I had, in that parking garage a year ago. Months passed. Greenbridge doubled in size. Then tripled. We expanded into new verticals, launched a mentorship program, even got featured in an industry magazine. One day, during a team lunch, one of our analysts, Carla, 23, whip-smart and quietly ambitious, asked me, "Do you ever regret it?" I knew what she meant. Getting fired. Walking away. Saying no to going back. I looked around at our office. At the women laughing over takeout containers. At the notes on the whiteboard, the coffee mugs with our logo, the business I'd built from nothing. And I answered her honestly. No, I said. Not for a second. Because the truth is, they didn't just fire me. They freed me. They thought they were ending my story. But really, they just made me the author. And I've only written the first chapter.